Hello there, and welcome to the Daily Dose of Lore. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we're drifting into Hawkins, Indiana, a small town that looks perfectly ordinary on the surface but holds secrets that stretch between dimensions. We'll explore the mysteries of the Upside Down, the hidden experiments of Hawkins' lab, and the quiet courage of those who faced the impossible. Some of these discoveries may surprise you. Others will simply drift by like autumn leaves on a gentle wind. If this helps you unwind, a like helps others find their way here too. But for now, let's begin our journey into the peculiar world of Stranger Things, starting with the town where it all began. Hawkins, Indiana sits in the American Midwest, a town of approximately 30,000 people nestled among forests and farmland. In the early 1980s, it embodied the quintessential small-town American experience, with tree-lined streets, a downtown area of local businesses, and neighborhoods where children rode bicycles freely until streetlights flickered on at dusk. The town's geography includes dense woods that stretch for miles, an abandoned quarry with deep, dark water, and residential areas where ranch houses and two-story homes sit comfortably apart. On autumn evenings, the air carries the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, while summer brings fireflies and the distant sound of the community pool. Hawkins had existed peacefully for generations, its residents unaware that beneath this ordinary surface, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The presence of Hawkins National Laboratory shaped the town's identity in ways most residents never understood. Built in the 1950s during the Cold War, the facility sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. To the public, it presented itself as a Department of Energy research facility, conducting studies on radiation and energy sources. Security was tight, with guards at every entrance and restricted areas clearly marked. The building itself rose several stories above ground, its architecture brutally functional, all concrete and small windows. But the true nature of the laboratory lay hidden below ground level, in basement floors where concrete walls were thicker and security protocols became increasingly stringent the deeper you descended. The people of Hawkins drove past it every day, never suspecting the experiments occurring beneath those unremarkable walls. Melvald's General Store served as a hub of community life, a modest establishment on Hawkins Main Street where locals purchased everything from groceries to hardware supplies. The store carried that particular smell of old buildings, mixing cleaning products, paper goods, and the faint mustiness of wooden floors that had seen decades of foot traffic. Joyce buyers worked behind the counter, ringing up purchases on an old register that dinged with each transaction. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a slightly greenish tint over the narrow aisles packed with merchandise. Regulars would stop to chat, discussing weather, local gossip, and high school football scores. The store's plate glass windows displayed handwritten sale signs, and a bell above the door announced each customer's arrival. In a town where the nearest big box store required a significant drive, Melvald's represented the kind of small business that formed the backbone of American small-town commerce in the pre-digital age. The Palace Arcade stood as the social center for Hawkins's youth, a dim space filled with the electronic cacophony of video games. Walking through the door meant entering a world of flashing lights, digital beeps, and the particular ozone smell of old electronics running hot. Rows of arcade cabinets lined the walls and formed islands throughout the space, each machine glowing in the darkness like a small altar to pixelated entertainment. Dig Dug, Dragon's Lair, Centipede, and Pac-Man competed for attention. their attract modes cycling through demonstrations when not in use. Quarters clinked against metal coin slots, and the carpet beneath showed years of spilled sodas and wear from countless shuffling feet. Teenagers and preteens gathered in clusters, watching friends attempt high scores, sharing tips, and establishing the social hierarchies that form around competitive play. The arcade manager, Keith, presided over this kingdom with a combination of boredom and authority, occasionally breaking up disputes or enforcing house rules from his position behind the prize counter. Hawkins High School contained all the standard features of American secondary education in the 1980s, from the gymnasium, where pep rallies echoed to the cafeteria with its long tables and mystery meat lunches. Lockers lined the hallways, painted in the school colors of orange and green, adorned with handwritten notes, stickers, and combination locks that students fumbled with between classes. The chemistry lab smelled of Bunsen burners and preservatives, while the library maintained its hushed atmosphere enforced by stern librarians. Bulletin boards displayed upcoming events, sports schedules, and college information. The parking lot separated into unofficial territories, with different social groups claiming their spaces. Popular students held a court near the front entrance, while others found refuge in less prominent areas. The social dynamics played out in these spaces daily, with hierarchies based on athletic ability, physical appearance, and conformity to unspoken standards. For many students, navigating these social currents proved more challenging than any academic subject. The woods surrounding Hawkins stretched dense and deep, a mix of deciduous trees that transformed with the seasons. In autumn, when much of Stranger Things unfolds, these forests became a tapestry of rust, gold, and deep red, with leaves carpeting the forest floor in layers that crunched underfoot. Narrow paths wound through the trees, some official trails, but many just tracks worn by years of use. The canopy filtered sunlight into shifting patterns, and the air held that particular scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. These woods held childhood adventures, served as shortcuts between neighborhoods, and provided privacy for teenage gatherings. But they also held dangers, from the quarry's steep drops to areas where one could easily become disoriented. When Will Byers vanished on the night of November 6, 1983, these familiar woods became something else entirely, transformed in the community's perception from a natural playground to a place of fear and mystery. The abandoned quarry on the edge of town had long served as both an attraction and a danger for Hawkins' youth. The old industrial site featured steep cliffs dropping to deep water below, the lake that formed in the abandoned pit reaching depths that made swimming dangerous despite the temptation on hot summer days. Rusted equipment and weathered warning signs spoke of the quarry's industrial past, while graffiti added by successive generations of teenagers marked favorite gathering spots. The water itself held a dark quality, reflecting the sky but revealing little of what lay beneath its surface. Kids would dare each other to jump from lower ledges, and older teenagers used the remote location for parties away from parental oversight. When a body was pulled from this water in November 1983, identified as Will Byers, the quarry's dark reputation deepened, though that identification would later prove to be something far stranger than a simple drowning. Starcourt Mall represented the arrival of modernity to Hawkins when it opened in the summer of 1985. The sprawling complex featured everything a mid-1980s mall could offer, from major department stores to specialty shops, from a food court with plastic seating to a multiplex cinema. The architecture embraced the decade's aesthetic, with lots of glass, chrome accents, neon signage, and open spaces designed to encourage browsing and spending. Air conditioning provided relief from Indiana summers, and the mall's music system played contemporary hits that echoed through the corridors. Stores like Gap, Sam Goody, and Claire's offered the latest fashions and trends. The food court featured Orange Julius, Hot Dog on a Stick, and other chains, their smells mingling in the artificial atmosphere. For Hawkins teenagers, Starcourt became the place to see and be seen, offering both employment opportunities and a new social hub. The mall's construction had devastating effects on downtown businesses like Melvald's, unable to compete with the convenience and variety of the new complex. Hawkins National Laboratory had its origins in Cold War paranoia and the real-world CIA program known as MK-Ultra. During the 1950s and 1960s, the American government conducted numerous experiments related to mind control, psychic abilities, and unconventional warfare techniques. MK-Ultra represented one of the most extensive of these programs, testing everything from LSD to sensory deprivation on unwitting subjects. While the real MK-Ultra was eventually exposed and officially ended, Stranger Things imagines a continuation of this research in a classified facility in Indiana. The laboratory's cover as a Department of Energy installation provided perfect camouflage, as DOE facilities legitimately required high security and often conducted research the public wasn't privy to. The basement levels of Hawkins' lab housed experiments that would have horrified the town's residents had they known. Research that pushed the boundaries of science into territory that seemed more like science fiction than legitimate study. Dr. Martin Brenner served as the face and driving force behind Hawkins' lab's most controversial experiments. A scientist with graying hair and a calm demeanor that masked ruthless determination, Brenner believed that the ends justified any means when it came to advancing human potential and protecting American interests. The children under his care called him Papa, a term he encouraged as it created a psychological bond that made them easier to control and manipulate. Brenner's methods combined genuine scientific rigor with profound ethical violations. He maintained detailed notes on every subject, conducted tests with the precision of a dedicated researcher, and spoke to the children in measured, almost gentle tones, even as he pushed them beyond reasonable limits. His ability to compartmentalize allowed him to see these children simultaneously as experimental subjects and as something resembling his own offspring. When Eleven escaped in 1983, Brenner mobilized every resource to find her, not just because she represented a security breach, but because he genuinely believed she belonged under his guidance and control. The numbered children of Hawkins' lab represented the laboratory's primary research focus. These individuals, identified by numbers tattooed on their wrists, had been selected for possessing latent psychic abilities that the laboratory sought to enhance and weaponize. The exact number of subjects remains unknown, but the series has shown us 3. 8, also known as Kali Prasad, who could create realistic illusions. 11, or Jane Ives, who possessed powerful telekinetic and psychic abilities. And 1, later revealed to be Henry Creel, whose abilities surpassed all others. These children lived in isolation, their days structured around testing, training, and development of their powers. Each wore plain institutional clothing, lived in sparse rooms with minimal personal possessions, and underwent daily sessions in testing chambers. The methodology combined psychological manipulation, repetition, and increasingly difficult challenges designed to push their abilities to the limit. Some children proved more successful than others, and the fate of those who failed to meet expectations has never been fully revealed, adding another layer of darkness to the laboratory's history. The sensory deprivation tank represented one of Hawkins' lab's most important tools for enhancing psychic abilities. This large, enclosed pool contained water supersaturated with Epsom salts, creating such high salinity that a person would float effortlessly on the surface. The water was heated to skin temperature, making it difficult to distinguish where the body ended and water began. In complete darkness and silence, wearing a specialized hood to block all sensory input, a subject would float in this void, deprived of external stimuli. This extreme sensory deprivation had the effect of turning one's perception inward, and for those with psychic abilities, it amplified their powers considerably. 11 used this tank to project her consciousness over vast distances, to locate specific individuals, and to eavesdrop on conversations happening thousands of miles away. The experience of the tank appears almost meditative, a state of pure consciousness floating in absolute nothingness, where the normal boundaries of space and distance become meaningless. On November 6, 1983, during a routine remote viewing session, 11 made contact with something that would change Hawkins forever. Floating in the sensory deprivation tank, her consciousness expanded beyond the normal world, into a space the lab's scientists called the Void, a black, featureless realm where 11's psychic presence could travel freely. On this particular evening, Dr. Brenner asked her to listen to a Russian conversation, a typical Cold War espionage task. But in that dark space, 11 sensed something else, something that definitely wasn't Russian. She encountered a creature, humanoid but wrong, standing in the void. When Brenner insisted she make contact despite her fear, 11 reached out and touched this being. The moment of contact created a catastrophic breach, a rift between dimensions that tore open in the basement of Hawkins' lab. The walls of the testing room cracked, equipment exploded, and a gate opened to another world. The creature 11 had touched, which would later be called the Demogorgon, now had a doorway between its dimension and ours, a doorway the laboratory would struggle to contain or understand. The gate that opened in Hawkins' lab's basement began as a relatively small tear, but it grew steadily over time, expanding like a wound that refused to heal. The laboratory immediately implemented containment protocols, sealing off the area and studying the phenomenon with a mixture of scientific fascination and growing dread. The gate itself appeared as a vertical slash in reality, pulsing with strange energy. The edges seemed organic rather than mechanical, as if the walls of the laboratory had been torn open to reveal flesh beneath the concrete. Strange tendrils occasionally emerged, and the temperature around the gate dropped noticeably. Air samples taken near the breach contained particles and spores that didn't match anything on Earth. The gate emitted a low-frequency hum that could be felt more than heard, and sensitive instruments detected electromagnetic fluctuations that defied normal physics. Scientists in hazmat suits approached cautiously, taking measurements and samples while armed guards stood ready. The laboratory's priority shifted from psychic research to understanding and controlling this gateway. But despite all their technology and expertise, the gate responded to no conventional scientific principles. The Upside Down received its name from the children of Hawkins, who needed a way to describe something that had no proper name. When describing this other dimension to their friends, they said it was like Hawkins, but dark and wrong, like everything was upside down. The name stuck, a child's simple logic applied to something that defied adult understanding. This parallel dimension exists as a dark reflection of our world, specifically of Hawkins, Indiana. Every structure, every street, every building has its counterpart in the Upside Down, but rendered in a state of decay and abandonment. The castle Byers that Will built in his backyard exists there. The Byers house stands in the same location. Even Melvald's general store has its shadow twin. But this is Hawkins transformed into a nightmare, a place where no one has ever lived, where buildings show decades or centuries of neglect despite being copies of structures only years old. The air itself feels thick and wrong, and an eerie silence pervades everything, broken only by distant sounds that might be thunder, might be something else entirely. The visual appearance of the Upside Down strikes anyone who sees it as profoundly wrong on an instinctual level. The sky, if it can be called that, roils with dark clouds illuminated by occasional flashes of red lightning, creating a perpetual twilight that never brightens into day. The atmosphere has a quality almost like being underwater, with particles floating through the air constantly, drifting like snow that never falls or rises, just hangs suspended. These particles resemble spores or seeds, and breathing them creates an unpleasant sensation, though their exact nature remains unknown. The color palette consists entirely of dark blues, blacks, and grays, with the only brightness coming from those crimson lightning flashes. Visibility remains poor, with mist or fog often obscuring the distance. When someone from the normal world speaks in the Upside Down, their voice sounds muffled and strange, as if the air itself dampens sound waves in unnatural ways. The entire dimension feels like a place where reality has gone slightly out of focus, where the normal rules no longer quite apply. Temperature in the Upside Down stays consistently cold regardless of what season it might be in the normal world. When Will Byers hid in this dimension during November, the cold was one of his first observations. A bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with normal weather. Summer in Hawkins might bring 90-degree heat, but step through a gate into the Upside Down and you'd need a jacket. This cold feels different from normal cold, more penetrating, as if it comes from the dimension itself rather than temperature. It doesn't fluctuate with time of day or change with the seasons because the Upside Down seems to exist outside normal temporal progression. The cold adds to the overall sense of wrongness, a physical discomfort that accompanies the visual horror of this place. Breath mists in front of faces, fingers grow numb, and prolonged exposure creates genuine risk of hypothermia even when it's summer, just a dimension away. This cold serves as a constant reminder that despite superficial similarities to Hawkins, this is an alien environment fundamentally hostile to human life. Organic matter covers every surface in the Upside Down, a network of vines and tendrils that grows over buildings, wraps around trees, and carpets the ground. These growths resemble plant life but with a distinctly alien quality, pulsing occasionally as if with a heartbeat, slick with moisture that might be sap, or might be something else entirely. The vines connect to everything, forming what appears to be a massive interconnected network, as if the entire dimension is one enormous organism. When someone touches these growths, they sometimes react, twitching or withdrawing slightly. Cutting through them reveals an interior that looks disturbingly biological, more like animal tissue than plant fiber. The tendrils seem to serve as neural pathways for the dimension itself, transmitting information or sensation across vast distances. This living carpet makes movement through the Upside Down even more unsettling, as every step squishes slightly, and one can't shake the feeling of walking across something that's not quite dead and not quite alive. Something that might be aware of your presence as you pass. In Season 4, Nancy Wheeler made a disturbing discovery about the nature of the Upside Down when she visited her own home in that dimension. Her bedroom existed there, preserved in detail, but when she examined her journal and notes, she realized everything was from 1983, specifically from around the time Will Byers first disappeared. The upside-down version of Hawkins isn't updated in real time with changes in the normal world. Instead, it seems frozen at a specific point in November 1983, the day Will vanished and the day the gate in Hawkins' lab was opened. Additions made to Hawkins after that date don't appear in the Upside Down. The Starcourt Mall, built in 1985, has no counterpart there. Renovations, new buildings, even something as simple as repainting a room. These changes don't transfer to the shadow dimension. This revelation raised profound questions about the nature of the Upside Down. Does it exist independently and just happened to copy Hawkins at that moment? Or did the opening of the gate somehow create this dimension, or link to it in a way that captured a snapshot of reality? The answer remains unknown, adding to the deep mysteries of this parallel world. Despite being a place of silence and emptiness, the Upside Down carries sounds from the normal world across the dimensional barrier. Will Byers discovered this during his week trapped there, when he could hear his mother's voice calling for him through the walls of his house. The sound arrived muted and distorted, like hearing someone speak from underwater or from another room. But it was unmistakably Joyce's voice, desperate and searching. This acoustic bleeding between dimensions works both ways. In the normal world, lights flicker and electricity behaves strangely when the Upside Down draws close. Joyce learned to communicate with Will through the Christmas lights she strung throughout her house, as Will could affect them from his side of the barrier. Sounds, too, could pass through, with Will's voice occasionally reaching through to the normal world, faint and ghostly. This permeability suggested the barrier between dimensions, while real wasn't absolute. In certain places and under certain conditions, the two worlds pressed close enough together that sound, light, and perhaps other things could leak across, creating pockets where reality grew thin and malleable. The Demogorgon, named by Mike, Lucas, and Dustin after the two-headed monster from their Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, represents the first creature from the Upside Down that Hawkins encountered. The name doesn't fit perfectly, as the creature possesses only one head, but that head opens like a flower, petals of flesh peeling back to reveal concentric circles of teeth surrounding a gaping maw. The Demogorgon stands roughly humanoid in shape, but moves with predatory grace that suggests something more evolved for hunting than humans could ever be. Its skin appears pale and slick, without visible eyes or other sensory organs on its closed face, yet it tracks prey with perfect precision. The creature seems to hunt by sensing blood, attracted to injuries as a shark might be, able to locate wounded prey across distances. When it's about to open its face to feed or attack, the petals twitch and shift, and a distinctive clicking sound emerges, a warning that gives potential victims a few seconds to react. The Demogorgon demonstrates considerable intelligence in its hunting patterns, learning to use the environment, setting ambushes, and remembering locations where it found prey before. The Demogorgon possessed the ability to create temporary portals between dimensions, smaller versions of the gate at Hawkins' lab. These portals appeared as tears in solid surfaces, walls becoming membranous and opening to allow the creature passage between worlds. The tears left behind looked organic, surrounded by a ring of decaying matter that spread outward from the breach. When a portal formed, the temperature dropped immediately, and the air took on that thick, wrong-quality characteristic of the Upside Down. These temporary gates didn't remain stable for long, sealing themselves over a period of time, but while open, they represented points of extreme danger where the barrier between dimensions had been weakened. The Demogorgon used these portals strategically, emerging to hunt in the normal world before retreating to the Upside Down with its prey. Barb Holland's disappearance occurred this way, the creature pulling her through a portal at the bottom of Steve Harrington's pool, leaving only blood and an unexplainable tear in the pool's concrete wall. Will Byers also was taken through such a portal, snatched from a shed and pulled into a dimension he had no way to understand or escape from. Will Byers' survival for an entire week in the Upside Down remains remarkable, given the hostile nature of that dimension. A 12-year-old boy, small for his age, artistic rather than athletic, managed to evade the Demogorgon through a combination of luck, intelligence, and sheer determination. He hid in the upside-down version of Castle Byers, the fort he'd built in his backyard, using it as a refuge where he could hear his mother's voice calling from the normal world. Will's knowledge of Hawkins's geography helped him navigate the dark mirror of his town, moving between hiding spots, always staying ahead of the creature hunting him. His mother's lights allowed him to communicate, spelling out messages letter by letter, proving he was alive even though everyone else believed the body in the quarry was real. Will also sang to himself, particularly his brother's favorite song, Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash, using music to maintain his courage in a place designed to break the spirit. By the time 11 opened a gate in the school to reach him, Will had been wounded by the creature, infected with something from the Upside Down, but he survived an ordeal that would have killed most people within days, if not hours. The slug that Will coughed up in the bathroom after his rescue represented the first sign that his connection to the Upside Down hadn't ended with his physical return. The creature he expelled resembled a tadpole or slug, pale and slimy, writhing in the sink before disappearing down the drain. This entity suggested biological contamination, that Will had brought something back with him from that dimension. Throughout the following months, Will experienced episodes where he would momentarily slip back into perceiving the Upside Down, seeing the dark version of Hawkins overlaid on normal reality. These episodes increased in frequency and duration, terrorizing the boy who thought his nightmare had ended. The episodes indicated a lingering connection, a psychic or dimensional link that made him vulnerable to influence from the Upside Down. This connection would eventually allow something vast and terrible to notice Will, to reach across dimensions and claim him as a host, beginning a new chapter of horror for Hawkins, as what had been defeated in 1984 found a new way to manifest itself in our world. The Mind Flayer appears in the Upside Down's sky as a massive shadow entity with a form reminiscent of a spider, though its shape shifts and flows like living smoke. This entity represents a higher order of being than the Demogorgon, something closer to a god or force of nature than a simple creature. When Will connected with it through his episodes, he described it as a presence, an awareness that noticed him and wanted to use him. The Mind Flayer, a name again borrowed from Dungeons & Dragons where it describes a psychic monster that controls other beings, seemed appropriate for this entity that sought to possess and control. The creature appears to have intelligence that's difficult to comprehend, operating on scales and with motivations that human minds struggle to grasp. It doesn't simply hunt, it strategizes, it plans, it adapts. When it couldn't reach through the closed gate in 1984, it found a way to send part of itself through will, to establish a foothold in our dimension even while the bulk of its being remained trapped on the other side. The Mind Flayer represented a fundamental escalation in threat, moving from predators that hunt to a consciousness that seeks domination. Will's possession by the Mind Flayer in 1984 transformed him into what the group called a spy, though he was more accurately described as an unwilling host. The shadow entity entered him during one of his episodes, flowing into his body and establishing control over his consciousness. When possessed, Will's eyes would roll back, his body would go rigid, and he would enter trances where the Mind Flayer looked through his eyes, using him to locate the gate and identify threats to its plans. The possession affected Will's body temperature, making him unnaturally cold, immune to heat that should have been uncomfortable. He began to feel a connection to a vast network of tunnels growing beneath Hawkins, an extension of the Upside Down spreading through the earth like roots. The Mind Flayer could access Will's memories, learning about his friends, his home, everything Will knew. But Will retained some awareness, some ability to fight back from within, using Morse code to send messages when he had the brief moments of control. The possession created an agonizing situation for Joyce and the others, as they couldn't simply attack the Mind Flayer without hurting Will, and they couldn't free Will without driving the entity out through an exorcism-like process that might kill him in the attempt. The tunnel system discovered beneath Hawkins in 1984 represented the Upside Down's attempt to spread into our dimension through subterranean expansion. These tunnels burrowed through the earth in a massive network that stretched for miles, all connected, all alive in the same way the vines in the Upside Down were alive. The tunnel's walls pulsed and breathed, covered in the same organic matter that carpeted the Upside Down, moist and warm like the interior of a body. Spores filled the air in heavy clouds that could kill through inhalation if someone breathed enough of them. The tunnels demonstrated growth patterns that suggested intelligence or purpose, spreading from the gate at Hawkins' lab like arteries from a heart, reaching toward specific locations as if following a plan. When Hopper and Bob Newby explored these tunnels, they discovered a vast hub where multiple passages converged, a central point that seemed to serve as a coordination center for the network. The lab's attempt to burn out these tunnels by flooding them with fire enraged the Mind Flayer, proving that the network wasn't just physical infrastructure, but something the entity valued and defended. Demo dogs, as Dustin named them, represented a new evolutionary stage or perhaps a juvenile form of the Demogorgon. These creatures resembled dogs in size and general body plan, moving on 4 legs rather than 2, but shared the Demogorgon's characteristic faceless head that opened into a flower of teeth. They hunted in packs, demonstrating coordination that suggested either intelligence or a hive mind connection. The demo dogs emerged from the tunnels beneath Hawkins in 1984, serving as soldiers for the Mind Flayer's assault on the laboratory. They killed Bob Newby in the Hawkins lab lobby, swarming him in seconds despite his desperate run for safety. The demo dogs appeared to be under direct control of the Mind Flayer, moving with purpose and responding to threats with organized tactics. However, Dustin's brief relationship with a baby demo dog he named Dart suggested these creatures might possess individual personalities, or at least the capacity to remember kindness. When the pack cornered Dustin in the tunnels, Dart recognized him and held the others back, allowing Dustin to pass unharmed, indicating that despite their monstrous nature, some spark of something other than pure predatory instinct might exist within them. Joyce's desperate attempt to save Will from the Mind Flayer's possession led to one of the most intense sequences in the series. Understanding that the entity within her son was vulnerable to heat, Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy transported Will to Hopper's cabin, isolated in the woods, and methodically heated the building to an unbearable temperature. They sealed windows, lit fires, and turned up every heat source available, transforming the cabin into a sweat lodge, an oven, pushing the temperature far beyond comfort into the realm of genuine danger. Will screamed and fought, not as himself, but as the Mind Flayer tried to maintain its hold, unable to tolerate the heat that meant nothing to humans but everything to a being from a cold dimension. They kept him tied to a chair to prevent the entity from making him hurt himself or others, and they spoke to him constantly, reminding him of who he was, of memories the Mind Flayer couldn't access or understand. Jonathan played the Clash song, their song, and slowly, agonizingly, Will began to reassert control, pushing the entity out through sheer force of will combined with environmental pressure. When the Mind Flayer finally released him, it left through Will's mouth as black vapor, abandoning its host rather than dying in the heat, escaping back to the dimension where it belonged. The Battle of Starcourt in the summer of 1985 marked a dramatic escalation in Hawkins's conflict with the Upside Down. That story began with Russians, rather than Americans, attempting to open a gate, using technology they'd somehow developed based on stolen or discovered research. They built a secret base beneath the new Starcourt Mall, hiding their massive energy weapon in plain sight, using the mall as cover while they attempted to tear open a doorway to the other dimension. Their success in opening a gate, even briefly, allowed the Mind Flayer to send a piece of itself through, a fragment that immediately set about possessing citizens of Hawkins, transforming them into the Flayed. These possessed individuals lost their identities, becoming extensions of the Mind Flayer's will, gathering the materials and biological mass the entity needed to construct a physical body in our world. The Mind Flayer's form, built from melted and reformed human tissue, rose in Starcourt's parking lot, a massive creature of flesh and malice that nearly killed the children who'd thwarted it before. The battle ended only when Hopper and Joyce destroyed the Russian gate-opening machine, severing the Mind Flayer's connection to its dimension and causing its physical form to collapse into inert matter, though at tremendous cost, as Hopper was apparently lost in the explosion. Eleven's childhood in Hawkins' lab was one of isolation and control, her entire world consisting of corridors, testing rooms, and her small bedroom. She wore simple institutional clothing, a hospital gown that made her look even younger and more vulnerable than she was. Her head was kept shaved, ostensibly for easier placement of monitoring equipment, but also serving to strip away any sense of normal childhood identity or vanity. She had no toys except for a single stuffed animal, no books, no entertainment beyond what the laboratory provided. Her days followed rigid schedules, tests, and training sessions, punctuated by meals eaten in silence under supervision. She knew other children existed in the lab, other numbers, but she had minimal contact with them. Dr. Brenner, whom she called Papa, represented her primary human relationship, a twisted dynamic where the man who caged her also provided the only affection or approval she ever received. When Eleven discovered that Brenner had lied to her, that her real mother was alive somewhere outside the lab, the betrayal shattered the psychological control he'd maintained. Her subsequent escape into the woods on November 6, 1983, wearing only her hospital gown in the cold rain, represented the first time in her memory that she'd been outside the laboratory's walls without supervision. 11's telekinetic abilities manifested in ways both subtle and devastating, depending on her emotional state and the effort required. At her most controlled, she could manipulate small objects with precision, levitate toys, or close doors from across a room. Under stress or anger, her powers became destructive, flipping vehicles, throwing grown men across rooms, or crushing objects into twisted wreckage. The effort required for these manifestations correlated directly with physical toll, visible as blood flowing from her nose. Minor exertions produced small nosebleeds, while major displays of power, like flipping the van on Hawkins' lab agents or fighting the Demogorgon, resulted in hemorrhaging from her nose and even her ears, leaving her weak and drained. Her powers seemed to draw on some internal reservoir of energy that required time to replenish. Push too hard for too long, and 11 would collapse, helpless and vulnerable. This limitation made her powerful but not invincible, a weapon that could fire only so many times before needing to rest and recover. The biological mechanism behind this energy drain was never explained, but the nosebleeds served as a visual indicator of how much strength she had left, a countdown to exhaustion. The sensory deprivation tank allowed 11 to project her consciousness into what she called the void, a black, featureless space where she could locate and observe specific individuals. In this space, she appeared to walk on a thin layer of water that reflected like a mirror, creating the impression of infinite depth below and around her. Target individuals appeared standing in this darkness, unaware of her presence, going about their activities while 11 observed from this psychic vantage point. She could hear their conversations, see their actions, and potentially influence or communicate with them if she chose. The void seemed to exist outside normal space, allowing 11 to find people hundreds or thousands of miles away, to locate individuals she had never met based on photographs or descriptions. This remote viewing ability made her invaluable to the laboratory's intelligence operations, able to spy on anyone, anywhere, without leaving the facility. The void appeared to connect to the Upside Down in some way, as the Demogorgon also appeared in this space, suggesting it might represent a liminal realm between dimensions, a place of pure consciousness where physical distance became meaningless. 11's encounter with Kali, also known as 8 in 1985, revealed that other children from the laboratory had also escaped and survived. Kali possessed the ability to create vivid, convincing illusions, making people see and hear things that weren't there. She'd used this power to disappear after escaping the lab, living on society's margins with a group of fellow outcasts. When 11 tracked her down, Kali tried to recruit her into a quest for revenge against the men who'd worked at Hawkins' lab, using their combined powers to punish those who'd hurt them. This episode represented a crossroads for 11, a choice between vengeance and returning to protect her friends. Kaylee taught 11 that emotions, particularly anger, could amplify her powers, allowing her to tap into deeper reserves of strength. She showed 11 how to focus rage and pain into fuel for her abilities, how to let go of mercy when confronting enemies. But ultimately, 11 rejected this path, recognizing that while Kali's anger was justified, acting on it would turn her into the very thing she'd escaped from, someone who used power to hurt and control others. She returned to Hawkins in time to help close the gate, choosing protection over revenge, friendship over bitterness. The massacre at Hawkins' lab on September 8, 1979, represented a turning point that 11 couldn't remember for years, her mind having blocked out the traumatic events of that day. In 1986, when she sought to recover her powers with Dr. Owens's help, she underwent a sensory deprivation procedure designed to access those buried memories. What she discovered horrified her. She'd been led to believe that she was responsible for killing the other test subjects in a fit of uncontrolled power, a guilt she carried for years. The truth proved even darker. Another subject, one, the first and most powerful of all the numbered children, had committed the massacre. This man, Henry Creel, possessed by something malevolent from childhood, had killed the other children and was preparing to kill 11 when she fought back. In that moment, young 11 accessed the full depth of her abilities and threw Henry Creel into the Upside Down itself, opening a gate in the wall of the Rainbow Room and casting him through it. This was the true origin of the gate at Hawkins' lab. Not the contact with the Demogorgon in 1983, but this earlier moment when 11 expelled one from our dimension. The revelation recontextualized everything 11 thought she knew about herself, removing the guilt of the massacre, but adding the terrible knowledge that she'd inadvertently sent something even more dangerous into the Upside Down, where it had years to grow stronger and more twisted. Henry Creel, also known as One and eventually as Vecna, represented a threat that combined human intelligence with supernatural power. Born in the 1950s, Henry had experienced visions and abilities from childhood, growing up in a house in Hawkins that would later become infamous. Whatever influenced or infected him shaped him into a being who viewed humanity with disgust, seeing human civilization as corrupt and seeking to reshape or destroy it. When 11 sent him to the Upside Down in 1979, the dimension transformed him, his body becoming twisted and burned, taking on characteristics of that realm while retaining and amplifying his psychic abilities. In the Upside Down, Henry became something more than human, taking the name Vecna after the D&D villain, a lich with terrible power. He gained the ability to reach across dimensions psychically, targeting individuals in Hawkins who carried trauma or guilt, pulling them into visions that would eventually kill them. Each death opened a small gate, and Vecna's plan required 4 such deaths to create gates in a specific pattern, a massive rift that would merge the dimensions and allow the Upside Down to consume Hawkins entirely. Vecna's curse operated through a methodical process that began with psychological targeting. He selected victims who carried trauma, guilt, or pain, their suffering apparently making them visible or vulnerable to his psychic reach. The curse began with headaches and nosebleeds, followed by visions where the victim saw things from their past, manifestations of their guilt or trauma. An old grandfather clock appeared in these visions, its chiming, counting down to the final moment. The visions grew more intense over time, pulling the victim deeper into a nightmare realm controlled by Vecna, where he could speak to them, torment them, and eventually kill them. When a victim succumbed, their body would rise into the air in the normal world, limbs snapping and twisting as bones broke, eyes collapsing into their skull. The moment of death coincided with a gate opening at the victim's location, a tier between dimensions marked by the same organic tearing that characterized all portals to the Upside Down. Vecna had killed 3 victims before the group understood his methodology, and his 4th target was Max Mayfield, whose trauma from her stepbrother Billy's death made her vulnerable to his influence. Music proved to be an unexpected defense against Vecna's curse, a discovery that saved Max's life when she teetered on the edge of succumbing to his influence. While trapped in one of Vecna's visions, with the entity approaching to deliver the killing blow, Lucas and the others played her favorite song, Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, through her Walkman headphones. The music reached through to Max wherever she was, creating a tether to reality and memories of happiness and connection. Music associated with strong positive emotions apparently created a psychic anchor that Vecna couldn't completely sever, giving his victims a chance to fight back and escape his mental realm. Max ran toward the sound, toward the memories it evoked, and broke free of his control moments before he could kill her, gasping back to consciousness in the graveyard where her friends held her. This discovery suggested that Vecna's power, while immense, had limitations. He fed on trauma and pain, but strong positive emotions, particularly those connected to music, could create resistance. After Max's escape, the group made sure everyone carried tape players with their favorite songs, creating a defense that was as much emotional as physical, using the power of memory and connection to fight against isolation and despair. The party, as Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and Will called their friend group, formed the heart of resistance against the Upside Down's threats. These 4 boys had been friends since childhood, bonding over their shared status as outsiders and their love of Dungeons and Dragons, science fiction, and fantasy. They spent countless hours in Mike's basement, rolling dice and imagining adventures, developing the kind of deep friendship that forms in the years before teenage social pressures complicate everything. When Will disappeared, the others refused to accept the official explanations or their parents' reassurances. They searched on their own, using their knowledge of Hawkins's geography and Will's habits, riding their bikes through the rain-soaked night, checking locations adults wouldn't think to investigate. Their discovery of 11 in the woods presented a dilemma, whether to help her or turn her over to authorities, but they chose to hide her, to trust this strange, silent girl with the shaved head and powers they didn't understand. That choice, made by children operating on instinct and compassion rather than adult logic, probably saved both Eleven's life and any chance of finding Will alive. The boys' walkie-talkies served as their primary communication method, creating a network that kept them connected across Hawkins's spread-out neighborhoods. These handheld radios, with their telescoping antennas and limited range, represented independence for kids in an era before cell phones. They'd established protocols, channels for different situations, and a special signal, 3 quick bursts of static that meant emergency. The radios crackled with static and sometimes picked up other conversations, CB radio operators or other kids in the area, but for the most part they provided reliable contact. When someone didn't respond on the walkie-talkie, it meant something was seriously wrong, a broken protocol that indicated danger. The radios extended their reach and allowed coordination during their investigations, letting them split up to cover more ground while maintaining contact. Dustin's radio, with its longer antenna and better range, often served as the hub, relaying messages between other party members when they drifted too far apart for direct contact. These simple devices became tools of resistance, allowing kids to operate independently of adults, to share information and coordinate responses to threats that the adult world refused to acknowledge or take seriously. Mike's basement served as party headquarters, a space where they could talk freely without parental supervision. The basement contained a couch, a television, a table for their D&D campaigns, and enough space to spread out and plan. Posters covered the walls, showing science fiction movies and bands. A stack of comic books occupied one corner, and toys and games filled shelves. This was a kid's space, designed for hanging out, for wasting time in the way that's essential to childhood friendship. When 11 needed to hide, the basement provided shelter, a place where Mike could keep her safe and fed, while keeping her existence secret from his parents. They transformed the basement into 11's home, bringing her Eggos for breakfast, letting her watch television, teaching her about the world she'd been sheltered from. Later, the basement would serve as planning central for operations against various threats, a place where they could puzzle out mysteries, debate strategies, and prepare for whatever came next. The basement represented their territory, a space where they held authority and could make decisions without adult interference. Dustin Henderson brought a unique perspective to the party, combining genuine scientific curiosity with unwavering optimism. While the others sometimes let emotion drive their decisions, Dustin approached problems methodically, explaining scientific concepts in ways his friends could understand. His knowledge of chemistry, biology, and physics proved invaluable when confronting threats from another dimension, allowing the group to theorize about the Upside Down's properties or the Demogorgon's behavior. Dustin also possessed social intelligence the others sometimes lacked, able to read situations and people, to diffuse tensions with humor, or redirect conversations when things got too heated. His friendship with Steve Harrington, an unlikely alliance between a nerd and the former king of Hawkins High, demonstrated Dustin's ability to see past surface impressions to recognize genuine goodness beneath. When Dustin discovered the proto-demogorgon he named Dart in his trash can, his scientific fascination initially outweighed his fear, leading him to attempt to raise and study the creature. This represented Dustin at his core, someone whose curiosity and desire to understand sometimes overcame more sensible instincts for self-preservation. Lucas Sinclair provided the party with practical skills and a grounded perspective that balanced Mike's impulsiveness and Dustin's theorizing. Lucas understood tactics and preparation, arriving at potentially dangerous situations with a backpack full of supplies, weapons, and tools. His wrist rocket, a powerful slingshot, became his signature weapon, used with considerable accuracy to defend his friends. Lucas also demonstrated willingness to challenge group decisions when he thought they were wrong, even if it caused conflict. When the party hit 11, Lucas expressed doubts about whether they should be protecting her or whether she represented a threat. Arguments that, while painful, were rooted in legitimate concern for his friend's safety. His relationship with Max when she moved to Hawkins showed Lucas navigating the complicated territory between friendship and romance, trying to integrate someone new into a group that had existed as a tight unit for years. Lucas often served as the voice advocating for direct action, for confronting problems head-on rather than hiding or running. A courage that sometimes bordered on recklessness, but came from a genuine desire to protect those he cared about. Max Mayfield arrived in Hawkins in 1985 as an outsider trying to find her place in an established social structure. Her stepbrother Billy's abusive behavior and her parents' troubled relationship created a home life she escaped from whenever possible, skateboarding through Hawkins's streets, seeking independence and distance from family dysfunction. Max initially came across as prickly and defensive, using attitude and snark to keep people at arm's length. But beneath that protective shell was someone desperate for genuine friendship and belonging. Her skills at video games, particularly Dig Dug, where she held the Palace Arcade's high score, and her fearlessness on her skateboard earned the party's respect, though her integration into the group created tensions, particularly regarding Eleven's jealousy about the attention Mike's friends gave this new girl. Max's relationship with Lucas developed into genuine affection, but her experiences with Billy's violence and eventual death left her carrying trauma and guilt that would make her vulnerable years later to Vecna's curse. Max represented resilience, continuing to push forward despite everything she'd endured, maintaining her loyalty to friends even as her own mental health deteriorated under the weight of loss and survivor's guilt. Will Byers remained the most enigmatic of the party members, his quiet nature and artistic temperament setting him apart from his louder, more outgoing friends. Before his disappearance, Will was the smallest, the most sensitive, the one most likely to be targeted by bullies, but also the one who created Castle Byers as a refuge, who drew and painted, who saw the world through an artist's eyes. His week in the Upside Down changed him profoundly, leaving him with trauma that no one else could fully understand and a lingering connection to that dimension that made him vulnerable to further attacks. Will's possession by the Mind Flayer in 1985 violated him in ways that left psychological scars. The experience of having his body controlled, his thoughts accessed, his sense of self overwhelmed by something alien. Throughout everything, Will struggled with feeling like a victim, like the weak link that needed protection, wanting to contribute and be useful but often sidelined by others' desire to keep him safe. His friendship with Mike, which had been the closest relationship in the party, became strained as they grew older, as Mike's relationship with Eleven took priority, leaving Will feeling abandoned and left behind. Will's journey involved not just surviving supernatural threats, but finding his identity and place in a world that had marked him as different in ways he couldn't control or change. The gate at Hawkins' lab became the primary focus of efforts to stop the incursions from the Upside Down. By 1984, the gate had grown significantly from its original size, expanding into a massive tear that required constant monitoring and containment. The laboratory constructed an elevator system that descended into the Earth to the gate's location, deep beneath the building in spaces that were formerly storage or testing areas. The gate chamber was kept sealed, accessible only through multiple airlocks and security checkpoints. Scientists in hazmat suits studied the phenomenon, taking measurements and attempting to understand the physics involved, though their efforts yielded more questions than answers. The gate demonstrated properties that defied conventional science, appearing to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, impossible to fully observe or measure with normal instruments. Energy readings fluctuated wildly, and the gate seemed to respond to events in the Upside Down, pulsing and expanding when activity increased on the other side. The laboratory's attempts to control or close the gate using conventional technology all failed, suggesting that only someone with Eleven's abilities could seal a breach that had been psychically opened. Eleven's return to Hawkins in 1984, after months living hidden in Hopper's cabin, came specifically to close the gate at the laboratory. With the Mind Flayer using the gate to send demo dogs and extend its influence into our world, closing the breach became critical to stopping the invasion. 11 descended into the Earth with Hopper, facing the gate in its chamber, a massive tear now large enough that tentacles and vines reached through from the Upside Down. The other dimension, clearly visible beyond the membrane that separated realities. Standing before this massive breach, 11 gathered her power and extended her hands toward the gate, and began to close it through sheer force of will. The effort was immense, blood streaming from her nose and ears as she poured energy into the task, literally forcing reality to knit itself back together. The gate resisted. the Mind Flayer itself visible on the other side, a massive presence pushing back against her efforts, trying to keep its pathway open. 11 screamed with exertion, her entire body shaking, but slowly, agonizingly, the gate began to shrink, reality reasserting itself, pushing the upside-down back. When the breach finally sealed completely, the barrier between dimensions restored, 11 collapsed, drained beyond anything she'd experienced before, having accomplished what an entire laboratory full of scientists could not. Jim Hopper served as Hawkins' chief of police, a position that seemed like a step down from his previous career in city law enforcement, but suited someone trying to escape his past. Hopper had lost his daughter Sarah to cancer years before, and that loss, combined with divorce and personal demons, had driven him to Hawkins, where he could be a relatively big fish in a small pond, handling noise complaints and small-town disputes rather than serious crime. When Will disappeared, Hopper initially approached the case with routine professionalism, but anomalies quickly caught his attention. Inconsistencies in the official story that his investigative instincts couldn't ignore. His discovery of the fake body at the morgue, a body supposedly pulled from the quarry but clearly manufactured, opened his eyes to a conspiracy involving the laboratory. Hopper broke into Hawkins' lab, fought through security, and confirmed that something far stranger than a missing child case was occurring. Throughout the series, Hopper evolved from a man sleepwalking through life, numbed by loss and substance abuse, to someone rediscovering purpose, finding in these kids and their impossible situations something worth fighting for, a chance at redemption, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance at having something like a family. Joyce Byers worked long hours at Melvald's to support her 2 sons as a single mother, stretching every dollar, shopping at thrift stores, doing whatever it took to make ends meet. She lived on the edge of Hawkins, in a house that needed repairs she couldn't afford, driving a car that broke down regularly, but she never let her sons go without necessities. When Will disappeared, Joyce's immediate conviction that he was alive, communicating with her through lights and electronics, made others think she was having a breakdown, suffering from denial and trauma. But Joyce had always been someone who trusted her instincts, who fought for her kids with a mother's fierce determination. She bought Christmas lights and strung them throughout her house, creating an alphabet on the wall so Will could spell out messages. And she listened when electricity behaved strangely, convinced that these phenomena represented her son reaching out from wherever he was trapped. Joyce's willingness to believe in the impossible, to pursue a theory that made her look crazy to her neighbors and even her family, proved correct when Will was found alive. This vindication didn't come with satisfaction, but with the recognition that the world contained dangers she'd never imagined, threats she'd need to continue fighting to protect her sons from. Nancy Wheeler embodied the conflict between conforming to expected roles and following her own sense of justice. As a popular, pretty girl from a respectable family, Nancy was supposed to care about the right clothes, the right boyfriend, the right path toward a conventional future. But she possessed a core of steel, a determination to pursue truth even when it was uncomfortable or dangerous. Her best friend Barb's disappearance and death became an obsession, as Nancy couldn't accept the official explanation or the general willingness to forget Barb existed. Nancy's investigation into Barb's fate led her to uncover the laboratory's cover-up, to partner with conspiracy theorist Murray Bauman, to risk her relationship with Steve, and to develop genuine respect for Jonathan Byers despite their different social circles. Nancy's evolution from suburban princess to investigative badass included learning to shoot, to fight, to make hard choices under pressure. She represented the idea that someone could be feminine and fierce, could care about clothes and justice, could want love but refuse to compromise her values for it. Jonathan Byers navigated life as the poor kid, the weird kid, the one whose family situation everyone knew about and pitied. His father had abandoned them, his mother struggled financially, and his brother was small and sensitive, making Jonathan feel responsible for protecting them both. Photography served as Jonathan's primary means of expression and escape, letting him observe the world through a lens, capturing moments and truths that others missed. His artistic eye and outsider perspective made him see things differently, notice details that others overlooked. When Will disappeared, Jonathan channeled his fear and grief into determined action, searching methodically, refusing to give up even when hope seemed lost. His partnership with Nancy during their investigation of the laboratory forced Jonathan to step outside his comfortable isolation, to trust someone from a world he'd always felt excluded from. Jonathan's relationship with Nancy developed slowly, built on shared trauma and mutual respect. Two people from different worlds who discovered they wanted the same things and valued the same qualities in each other. Steve Harrington's transformation from high school king to unlikely hero represents one of the series' most satisfying character arcs. Initially presented as the popular jock, Nancy's boyfriend who cared more about his hair and his reputation than anything substantive, Steve showed unexpected depths when confronted with genuine danger. His first hints of heroism came when he returned to the Byers' house to apologize, and instead found himself battling a monster from another dimension with a nail-studded baseball bat. That bat became Steve's signature weapon, and his willingness to stand and fight rather than run established him as someone with more courage than anyone, including himself, had realized. Steve's friendship with Dustin cemented his transition from asshole to decent person, as he genuinely cared about this middle schooler, gave him advice about girls, and treated him with respect rather than the condescension Dustin usually received from older teens. By 1985, Steve had graduated and was working at Scoops Ahoy ice cream parlor in Starcourt Mall, wearing a ridiculous sailor uniform but maintaining his dignity, and discovering that his value came from his loyalty, his willingness to protect others, and his ability to take massive physical abuse while somehow remaining functional enough to keep fighting. Robin Buckley entered the story as Steve's co-worker at Scoops Ahoy, initially seeming to delight in mocking his failed attempts to flirt with female customers. She was smart, fluent in multiple languages including Russian, and possessed a sardonic wit that cut through Steve's remaining pretensions. When Russian codes intercepted by Dustin needed translation, Robin's linguistic skills proved essential. Her developing friendship with Steve, forced to spend endless hours together in matching sailor uniforms, evolved from antagonism to genuine affection, with Robin seeing past Steve's popular kid facade to the surprisingly good person beneath. When Russian agents drugged them, and Steve expected a love confession as she prepared to tell him something important, Robin instead came out, explaining that she'd been obsessed with Steve in high school, but not because she wanted to date him, because she'd wanted to be him, because she'd liked the girl he was dating. Steve's immediate acceptance, his shift from romantic interest to unconditional friendship, marked his complete transformation from the person he'd been. Robin and Steve became inseparable, their friendship pure and uncomplicated by romantic tension, proving that sometimes the best relationships are platonic bonds built on mutual respect, shared trauma, and an in-joke vocabulary that makes no sense to anyone else. Murray Bauman operated as Hawkins' local conspiracy theorist, a former journalist turned investigator who lived alone, paranoid about surveillance and convinced of government cover-ups. His abrasive personality and tendency toward elaborate conspiracy thinking made him easy to dismiss. But Murray's instincts about institutional lying proved correct more often than not. When Nancy and Jonathan approached him with evidence of the laboratory's involvement in Barb's death, Murray helped them strategize how to expose the truth in a way that would be believed. His advice to dumb it down acknowledged that people couldn't handle the full truth about interdimensional monsters, so they needed to create a believable cover story that would satisfy the public's need for answers without triggering mass panic. Murray's role expanded over the seasons, his Russian language skills proving useful when that nation's involvement in the upside-down situation became apparent. Despite his paranoid tendencies and rough edges, Murray genuinely wanted justice and truth, fighting in his own way against the forces that preferred secrets and lies to transparency and accountability. Erica Sinclair, Lucas's younger sister, spent her early appearances as comic relief, a precocious entitled kid obsessed with My Little Pony and demanding free ice cream samples. But when the group needed someone small enough to crawl through air ducts in the Russian base beneath Starcourt Mall, Erica volunteered, proving that beneath her princess attitude lay genuine courage. Her willingness to risk herself, combined with her sharp tongue and refusal to be condescended to, made her an unexpected asset. Erica didn't have powers or special training. She was just a kid who decided that sitting safely at home wasn't an option when her brother and his friends needed help. Her matter-of-fact response to discovering Russian soldiers and secret bases beneath her mall demonstrated remarkable adaptability, processing the impossible and moving forward without the existential crisis such discoveries might trigger in adults. Erica represented the resilience of Hawkins' youth. Kids who'd grown up adjacent to so many strange events that encountering more just became another problem to solve, rather than something to fear or deny. Eddie Munson led the Hellfire Club, Hawkins High's Dungeons & Dragons group, in 1986, a metalhead with wild hair and a theatrical personality who'd been held back multiple times and wore his outsider status proudly. Eddie dealt drugs on the side, nothing heavy but enough to get by, and lived in a trailer with his uncle in the less affluent part of town. His loud, aggressive persona masked genuine kindness and a tendency to protect kids who didn't fit in, giving them a place to belong in Hellfire. When Chrissy Cunningham died in his trailer, killed by Vecna's curse in a way that looked like satanic ritual murder, Eddie became Hawkins's most wanted suspect. He hid in a boathouse, terrified and accused of something he didn't understand, until Dustin and the others found him and explained about the Upside Down. Eddie's journey from accused killer to accepted ally to ultimate sacrifice happened quickly, compressed into days of hiding, planning, and finally fighting. His decision to stay behind in the Upside Down, to draw the demo bats away from his friends, even knowing he probably wouldn't survive, represented Eddie choosing to finally graduate, to become the hero he'd always played in D&D campaigns, to save a town that had never accepted him, but that contained kids he'd come to care about deeply. Bob Newby, Joyce's boyfriend in 1985, worked at Radio Shack and approached life with unrelenting optimism and genuine kindness. He was nerdy, unpretentious, and completely devoted to Joyce and her sons, trying to integrate himself into their family and be the stable father figure Will and Jonathan had never had. Bob represented normalcy, someone untouched by the traumas that haunted the Byers family, and his suggestions to move away from Hawkins, to start fresh somewhere without bad memories, came from a place of loving concern rather than avoidance. When Will's episodes began, Bob tried to help using normal therapeutic approaches, encouraging Will to face his fears and tell them to go away, advice that would have worked for regular nightmares but proved dangerously inadequate for an entity like the Mind Flayer. Bob's finest hour came in Hawkins' lab's basement, when the power went out and demo dogs swarmed the building. Bob, who knew computers and electrical systems, volunteered to restore power by manually resetting breakers in a basement crawling with monsters. He succeeded, turning the lights back on and unlocking doors, but the creatures caught him before he could reach safety. Bob's death, torn apart by demo dogs while Joyce and others watched helplessly through glass, was brutal and unfair, claiming someone whose only crime was loving a woman with a complicated past and trying to help her family. The 4 gates that Vecna planned to open required 4 victims, 4 deaths to occur at specific locations that would form a pattern across Hawkins. His first 3 victims, Chrissy Cunningham, Fred Benson, and Patrick McKinney, created 3 points of a compass, their deaths opening small rifts that weakened the dimensional barrier. The 4th gate, targeted to open at Max's location, would complete the pattern and tear Hawkins apart. When Max volunteered to serve as bait, using herself to draw Vecna out while Nancy, Steve, and Robin attacked his physical body in the Upside Down, she understood she might die. The plan required her to enter Vecna's vision, to let him get close enough to kill her while the others destroyed his body in the other dimension. Max endured visions of her worst memories, of Billy's death and her role in it, of her mother's grief, of every failure and regret amplified until they became unbearable. She nearly died, her bones beginning to break, her eyes starting to collapse. But the attack on Vecna's body disrupted his concentration long enough for her to escape. However, Vecna wasn't finished. Minutes later, he attacked again, and this time there was no music to save her, no escape prepared. Max died in Lucas's arms, her limbs broken, her vision gone, dying while telling Lucas she wasn't ready to die. 11, connected psychically from miles away, reached into Max's fading consciousness and pulled her back, restarting her heart through sheer force of will. Max lived, but at tremendous cost, comatose, blind, broken, technically alive but so damaged that her recovery remained uncertain. Max's near death, even though 11 revived her, counted as a death for Vecna's purposes, and the 4th gate opened. The 4 rifts tore across Hawkins simultaneously, massive cracks that split the earth and buildings, spreading from their origin points like lightning frozen in soil. The gates connected, forming a massive X across the town, tearing Hawkins apart along these dimensional fault lines. The Upside Down began to bleed through these tears, spores drifting into the normal world, vines creeping across the boundaries, the cold and darkness of that dimension spreading like an infection. 2 days later, Hawkins looked like a disaster zone, with government officials evacuating citizens, Red Cross stations set up at the high school, and families fleeing what looked like an earthquake's aftermath, but was actually something far worse. The barriers between dimensions were collapsing, and the Upside Down was slowly claiming Hawkins, transforming it into a hybrid realm where both dimensions existed, simultaneously, overlapping and merging. Several mysteries remain unanswered even after 4 seasons of Stranger Things, questions the series has deliberately left open or simply hasn't addressed. The true nature and origin of the Upside Down itself remains unknown. Did it exist before 11 opened the first gate, or did her actions somehow create it? If it existed independently, why does it appear as a copy of Hawkins specifically? And why is that copy frozen at November 6, 1983? The series has never explained these fundamental questions about the dimension's nature. The relationship between the Upside Down and the Mind Flayer also remains ambiguous. Is the Mind Flayer native to that dimension, or did it arrive from somewhere else? Is it the ruler of the Upside Down, or just one powerful entity among potentially many? When Will was possessed, he described the Mind Flayer as ancient, but how old, and where did it come from? These questions linger without answers. The fate of the numbered children beyond 1, 8, and 11 remains a mystery that haunts the edges of the story. In Season 4, when 11 explored her suppressed memories, she saw other children in the Rainbow Room at Hawkins' lab, kids with numbers tattooed on their wrists like hers. During the massacre of 1979, one killed all these other subjects, leaving only 11 alive. But the series has shown us that at least 2 other numbered children, 8 and 11, escaped the laboratory at different times. Were there others who also escaped and are living in hiding? How many children did the laboratory take over the years? The lab's files and records might contain answers, but they've never been fully revealed. The methodology for finding these children, how the laboratory identified individuals with latent abilities and acquired them, remains largely unexplained. Did they take children from families, or find orphans, or use some other method? These questions about the full scope of the laboratory's program remain unanswered. Will's ongoing connection to the Upside Down presents another mystery. Even after the Mind Flayer was expelled from his body, even after the gates were closed, Will retained some ability to sense when the Upside Down was near. In Season 3, he felt the Mind Flayer's presence when it returned to Hawkins through the Russian gate. In Season 4, he sensed Vecna's activities and the opening of new gates. This lingering connection suggests permanent changes to Will's physiology or consciousness, a link forged during his week trapped in that dimension and strengthened during his possession. The series has never fully explained the mechanics of this connection or whether it makes Will vulnerable to future influence. Does he sense the Upside Down because of physical changes, like the slug he coughed up in Season 1? Or is the connection purely psychic? Can the Upside Down sense him in return, making him a beacon or target? Will's understanding of this connection and his reluctance to discuss it fully suggests he knows more than he's sharing. But what exactly he knows and what it means for his future remains uncertain. The Russian government's knowledge of the Upside Down and how they acquired it represents another significant unexplained element. By 1985, the Russians had developed a technology capable of opening gates to the Upside Down, constructing a massive machine beneath Starcourt Mall that could tear holes between dimensions. This suggests they had extensive information about the phenomenon, likely through espionage or captured research from Hawkins' lab. But the series has never shown how they obtained this information, who their sources were, or how much they understood about what they were doing. The Russian facility beneath Starcourt represented enormous investment and risk, suggesting their government considered the Upside Down strategically valuable despite its dangers. In Season 4, Russians held a captive Demogorgon and used prisoners as test subjects, demonstrating ongoing research into these entities. This implies a continued program somewhere, possibly multiple facilities, dedicated to studying and potentially weaponizing the Upside Down. the full scope of Russian involvement and their ultimate goals remain mysterious. Vecna's full capabilities and the extent of his power remain somewhat unclear despite his defeat in Season 4. When Nancy, Steve, and Robin burned his physical body with Molotov cocktails and shot him repeatedly, Vecna fell from the window of the Creel house and disappeared. His body was gone when they checked, suggesting he either survived, or his remains dissolved, or were pulled back into the Upside Down. The series left his fate ambiguous, neither confirming his death nor showing him alive. Given his nature as something more than human, transformed by years in the Upside Down and possessing tremendous psychic power, his survival seems possible, even likely. The Mind Flayer's fate is similarly unclear. Was it destroyed when the Russian gate closed in Season 3? Or did it merely lose its foothold in our dimension? Is Vecna connected to or controlled by the Mind Flayer, or are they separate entities with aligned goals? The power structure and hierarchy of the Upside Down's inhabitants remains mysterious. The grandfather clock that appears to Vecna's victims, a vision of an ornate antique timepiece that chimes to mark their approaching death, connects to the real clock in the Creel house, standing stopped at a specific time. But the significance of the clock, why Vecna chose it as a symbol or calling card, remains unexplained. Is it connected to a specific moment in his past, perhaps the time of some significant event in his life? Does it represent his view of time, of being trapped in a moment, of wanting to stop or reverse time? The clock appears prominently in his victims' visions, becoming more central as they sink deeper into his influence, but its meaning beyond being a death omen hasn't been revealed. Many of Vecna's choices and methods raise similar questions about his psychology and motivations that the series hasn't fully explored. The town of Hawkins' future, as of the end of Season 4, appears grim and uncertain. With massive gates torn across the town, the Upside Down bleeding through, and significant portions of the population evacuated, Hawkins might be beyond saving. The government's response has been to treat it as a natural disaster, earthquake damage, maintaining the cover story that's concealed the truth for years. But can Hawkins be saved? Or will it become the first place where the Upside Down fully manifests in our world? A permanent hybrid zone where both dimensions exist. If Hawkins falls, will the contamination spread, reaching other towns and cities? Or is there something specific about Hawkins that makes it vulnerable? The implications for the world at large, if the dimensional barriers continue to weaken, remain unexplored. The series has focused tightly on this one town, these specific characters, but the potential exists for a much larger catastrophe, one that could affect the entire world if the Upside Down can't be contained or pushed back. The role of music in Stranger Things extends beyond Max's salvation from Vecna through running up that hill, though that moment elevated Kate Bush's 1985 song to new prominence decades after its release. The series' soundtrack has consistently used period-appropriate music to establish atmosphere and emotional resonance. Will's connection to Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash, taught to him by Jonathan as a song to listen to when he felt scared, served as a thread throughout Season 1, the song playing during crucial moments and representing the bond between the brothers. The instrumental score, composed by Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein of the band Survive, deliberately evokes 1980s synthesizer-driven soundtracks, particularly John Carpenter's work on films like Halloween and Escape from New York. The score's pulsing, analog synthesizer textures create instant nostalgia for those who remember that era while introducing younger audiences to a sound that's simultaneously retro and fresh. The theme song's simple but memorable melody has become iconic, immediately recognizable, setting the tone for each episode with its ominous, building intensity. Stranger Things draws heavily from 1980s pop culture, with the Duffer Brothers wearing their influences openly. The series references Steven Spielberg's suburban adventure films like E.T. the Extraterrestrial and The Goonies, Stephen King's horror novels and their adaptations, John Carpenter's atmospheric horror films, and countless other touchstones from that decade. These aren't just shallow name drops, but genuine engagement with the themes and styles that made those works memorable. The series explores childhood friendship and the loss of innocence, small-town secrets and government conspiracies, the power of outcasts and misfits to become heroes when adults fail. Dungeons & Dragons features prominently, not just as a game the kids play, but as a framework they use to understand and discuss the impossible things happening around them. The Demogorgon, the Mind Flayer, Vecna. These names come from D&D, applied by kids who need to categorize threats in terms they understand. The series also engages with how that era viewed and treated difference, from Will's subtle coding as perhaps gay or simply sensitive in ways that made him vulnerable to bullying, to Robin's more explicit coming out, to the way Hawkins responds to anyone who doesn't fit conventional expectations with suspicion and hostility. The series' impact on popular culture has been substantial, with multiple seasons among Netflix's most watched content and significant influence on fashion, music, and media. The show sparked renewed interest in 1980s aesthetics, with younger viewers discovering that era's music, fashion, and style through the series' meticulous recreation. Running Up That Hill charted internationally nearly 40 years after its original release, introducing Kate Bush to a new generation. The show also influenced how streaming services approach series, with Netflix giving the Duffer Brothers substantial budgets and creative freedom, trusting them to deliver a product that would justify the investment. The success validated Netflix's model of releasing entire seasons at once, allowing binge-watching and creating cultural moments where everyone watches and discusses together. The series' young cast became celebrities, with Millie Bobby Brown, Finn Wolfhard, and others launching careers that extended well beyond Hawkins. The show demonstrated that genre television could be both critically acclaimed and massively popular, that horror and science fiction could attract mainstream audiences when executed with care and heart. The practical effects and creature design in Stranger Things deserve recognition for creating tangible, visceral threats that feel real despite their fantastic nature. The production relied heavily on practical effects, prosthetics, and actual sets rather than purely digital creation, giving the monsters and the Upside Down a physicality that enhances their horror. The Demogorgon, built as a practical suit and head, moves with weight and presence that purely CGI creatures often lack. The petals of its face open mechanically, revealing the detailed interior that practical effects artists sculpted and engineered. The Upside Down's sets were actual constructed environments, familiar locations redressed and filled with atmosphere machines creating the spore-filled air, allowing actors to interact with real environments rather than green screens. This commitment to practical creation, while more expensive and time-consuming than digital alternatives, creates images that feel grounded and real, enhancing the horror because your brain registers these as physical, things that existed in space, not as pixels added later. As the series approaches its final season, numerous threads remain unresolved, questions that will hopefully find answers as the story concludes. The nature of the Upside Down itself, Vecna's survival or death, the fate of Max, whether Will's connection to that dimension can be severed or will define him forever, how Hawkins and the world will respond to the dimensional incursion. These mysteries await resolution. The series has built toward a confrontation that will likely determine not just Hawkins' fate, but potentially the world's, as the barriers between dimensions continue to erode. 11 has lost her powers again, a pattern across the series where she loses and regains her abilities through trauma and recovery. But whether she'll be able to access them when needed most remains uncertain. The group has faced each threat through combination of 11's powers and their own courage and ingenuity. But the final battle may require something more, some sacrifice or discovery that hasn't yet been revealed. The series has earned trust through 4 seasons of quality storytelling, building a world and characters worth caring about, delivering both entertainment and genuine emotional resonance. As it moves toward its conclusion, that trust remains. Anticipation for how these stories will end, hope that the resolution will honor what's been built, and certainty that whatever comes, this journey through Hawkins, Indiana, and the dark dimension beyond has been something special, something that captured lightning in a bottle and shared it with millions of viewers who found themselves caring deeply about these kids and their impossible situations, about friendship and courage, about the power of memory and music and connection in the face of darkness that seeks to isolate and destroy. As we drift away from Hawkins tonight, we carry with us these stories, these moments, these mysteries that remain. Some questions have answers, others linger in shadow, but all of them remind us that the world contains more than we can see, that courage often comes in small packages, and that home, whatever form it takes, is worth defending against any threat from any dimension. The Byers house on the edge of Hawkins became the center of strange phenomena in 1983, beginning with the night Will disappeared. Joyce's phone began melting and sparking, receiving calls that seemed to come from nowhere, with Will's voice barely audible through static and distortion. The electrical system behaved impossibly, lights flickering in patterns, burning out bulbs with alarming frequency, drawing far more power than the wiring should have allowed. When Joyce covered her walls with Christmas lights and painted an alphabet beneath them, the lights began responding to Will's presence in the Upside Down, illuminating letters to spell out messages. The house itself seemed to become a thin place, a location where the barrier between dimensions grew permeable enough for communication to pass through. In the living room wall, a membrane formed, pulsing and organic, through which the Demogorgon could partially emerge, its clawed hand reaching through to grab at Joyce. The house's modest, working-class interior, with its floral wallpaper and worn furniture, became the stage for impossible events, the ordinary transformed into a gateway. After everything that happened there, after the walls bore scars from supernatural intrusions and the memories of trauma soaked into every room, Joyce eventually moved her family away, unable to continue living in a place where every corner held reminders of the week she nearly lost her son. Dr. Sam Owens replaced Dr. Brenner as the public face of Hawkins Lab's operations after the 1983 catastrophe, presenting a very different approach to the situation. Where Brenner had been cold and manipulative, Owens projected warmth and reasonableness, genuinely seeming to care about the people affected by the laboratory's mistakes. He reached out to the Byers family, monitoring Will's condition after his rescue, providing medical care, and attempting to help with the episodes and lingering effects of Will's time in the Upside Down. Owens operated under enormous pressure from government officials who wanted to shut down the situation permanently, cover up all evidence, and eliminate any loose ends that might expose the truth. He worked to protect Eleven, Joyce, Hopper, and the others, recognizing that these people who'd been harmed by government experimentation deserved help rather than punishment for knowing too much. When the tunnels beneath Hawkins required elimination, Owens authorized burning them out despite knowing it would provoke the Mind Flayer, choosing the lesser of evils. His pragmatic approach acknowledged that the Upside Down represented an ongoing threat requiring management, rather than something that could be simply covered up and forgotten. Owens reappeared in 1986 when Eleven needed to recover her powers, facilitating her treatment in a secret facility, continuing to walk the line between government interests and doing what he believed was right. The Nina Project in 1986 represented Dr. Owens's attempt to help Eleven recover the powers she'd lost after the Battle of Starcourt. The facility, hidden in the Nevada desert, utilized a sensory deprivation tank combined with psychoactive compounds to help Eleven access suppressed memories from her childhood at Hawkins' lab. The theory held that her powers remained within her, blocked by trauma and psychological barriers erected to protect herself from memories of the 1979 massacre. By reliving those memories, confronting the truth of what happened, Eleven could potentially break through the blocks and access her abilities again. The process was agonizing, forcing her to experience the worst day of her young life in vivid detail, watching helplessly as one killed the other children, feeling again the terror and rage that had allowed her to throw him into the Upside Down. Each session in the tank pushed deeper into her past, peeling away layers of repression until the full truth emerged. The revelation that she hadn't caused the massacre, that she'd actually been defending herself and stopping a monster, lifted guilt she'd carried for years. This psychological unburdening, combined with reconnecting to the emotional state that had first manifested her powers, allowed Eleven to recover her abilities stronger than before, refined by understanding rather than fear and anger. The Nina Project succeeded not through forcing her powers to return, but by healing the trauma that had locked them away. Terry Ives, Eleven's biological mother, participated in MK-Ultra experiments while pregnant, not knowing that the program's true interest lay in her unborn child. Terry had volunteered for what she believed were harmless psychological studies, needing money and trusting that legitimate scientists wouldn't cause harm. Instead, she became subject to drug trials, sensory deprivation, and procedures designed to enhance latent psychic abilities. When she gave birth to a daughter, Jane, the laboratory claimed the baby died during delivery, but Terry never believed this. She spent years searching for her child, investigating Hawkins' lab, attempting to break in to find proof. During one infiltration attempt, laboratory security caught her, and Dr. Brenner ordered her subjected to electroshock therapy, multiple sessions that destroyed her cognitive function and left her in a permanent catatonic state. When Eleven finally met her mother in 1984, Terry sat unmoving in a chair, eyes unfocused, living in an endless loop of memories playing through her damaged mind. Through psychic connection, Eleven entered her mother's consciousness and experienced Terry's memories, learning the truth of her birth and Dr. Brenner's lies. The tragedy of Terry Ives represents one of the laboratory's most heinous acts, destroying a woman's mind to protect secrets, taking a mother's child, and then taking her sanity when she fought to recover what had been stolen. Becky Ives, Terry's sister, had cared for her for years after the electroshock therapy left Terry in her vegetative state. Becky cleaned her, fed her, spoke to her even though Terry couldn't respond, maintaining a home where her sister sat in the same chair day after day, watching the same television program on an endless loop. The strain of being Terry's sole caretaker, combined with the knowledge of what had been done to her sister and the powerlessness to seek justice, weighed on Becky heavily. When Eleven appeared, claiming to be Terry's daughter, Becky's initial skepticism gave way to desperate hope, but also fear of what it would mean if this girl was indeed Jane Ives. The government had destroyed Terry for asking questions, for refusing to accept their lies, and Becky had learned to stop pushing, to accept the situation rather than risk sharing her sister's fate. Becky's situation illustrated the lasting damage the laboratory's actions caused, how trauma rippled outward, affecting not just direct victims but their families, creating cycles of loss and suffering that continued years after the initial harm was inflicted. The Hawkins Post newspaper served as the town's primary news source, a small operation that covered local events, school sports, town council meetings, and the occasional scandal. Nancy Wheeler secured an internship there in 1985, hoping to pursue her interest in journalism, but found herself relegated to coffee fetching and busy work by editors who didn't take young women seriously as potential reporters. The newspaper's coverage of events in Hawkins consistently followed official narratives, printing what the government and laboratory wanted publicized while ignoring evidence of anything strange. When Nancy tried to investigate the story of diseased rats that were actually hosting the Mind Flayer's influence, her bosses dismissed her concerns and ultimately fired her for pursuing a story they deemed nonsense. The newspaper represented institutional complicity in the cover-up, whether through actual knowledge of the truth or simple willingness to accept official stories without investigation. Small-town papers like the Hawkins Post relied on relationships with local power structures dependent on access and advertising revenue, making them unlikely to challenge authorities even when evidence suggested something was seriously wrong. The paper's failure to investigate or report on the genuine threats in Hawkins left the population uninformed and vulnerable, trusting in normalcy while danger grew beneath their notice. The public cover story for events in Hawkins evolved across the years, adjusting to explain increasingly difficult to conceal phenomena. Will Byers' disappearance was officially explained as a drowning, with a fake body provided to close the case, though that explanation fell apart when Will returned alive. Barbara Holland's disappearance became a runaway case officially, though her parents knew better, and Nancy eventually exposed that Barb had died due to toxic chemical exposure from the laboratory. A partial truth that explained her death without revealing the full horror. The tunnels beneath Hawkins were explained as a natural gas leak that required controlled burning to eliminate. The Battle of Starcourt was attributed to a shopping mall fire, with blame placed on faulty electrical systems. The gates that tore across Hawkins in 1986 were called earthquake damage, seismic activity that tragically damaged the town. Each cover story required cooperation from multiple agencies, falsified reports, manipulated evidence, and suppression of witnesses. The government's ability to maintain these deceptions relied on people's willingness to accept mundane explanations, rather than consider impossible alternatives, on the natural human tendency to rationalize away things that don't fit our understanding of how reality works. The Mind Flayer's physical form, constructed in 1985 from the melted and reformed bodies of the flayed, represented a grotesque achievement of biological manipulation. The entity built itself a body in our dimension, a towering mass of flesh, bone, and tissue that moved with purpose despite having no conventional anatomical structure. The construction process involved the flayed gathering at specific locations, their bodies breaking down at the molecular level, flesh becoming liquid that flowed together and reformed according to the Mind Flayer's will. The resulting creature stood several stories tall, with multiple appendages that could extend and attack, crush vehicles, smash through walls. The body appeared partially transparent, with bones visible within the flesh, organs pulsing. The interior anatomy of multiple people somehow merged into a single functioning organism. The creature moved through Starcourt Mall with devastating efficiency, hunting 11 specifically, recognizing her as the greatest threat to its plans. When the Russian gate closed and the Mind Flayer's connection to the Upside Down severed, this physical form collapsed immediately, the tissue losing cohesion, melting back into inert biological matter. The corpse it left behind required extensive cleanup and provided government scientists with unprecedented samples of upside-down contaminated tissue, though what they learned from studying this material has never been disclosed. Alexei, the Russian scientist who worked on the gate-opening machine beneath Starcourt, became an unexpected ally when Hopper and Joyce captured him during their investigation. Alexei spoke no English, requiring Murray's translation, creating a barrier that initially made him seem cold and mechanical. But as time passed, Alexei's personality emerged, revealing someone who loved Woody Woodpecker cartoons, who'd been conscripted into working on a project he didn't fully understand by a government that gave him no choice. Alexei explained the mechanics of the Russian operation, how they'd developed technology to force open gates to the Upside Down through brute force energy application, and where the keycard protected weak points in their security existed. His genuine wonder at experiencing American culture, from cartoons to carnival games to slushies, revealed an innocence that made his death particularly painful. When a Russian assassin shot him at the 4th of July carnival, killing him for his betrayal, Alexei died far from home, having briefly tasted freedom and friendship before violence reclaimed him. His death served as a reminder that the Cold War tensions underlying the Russian plot had real stakes, that governments viewed people as expendable assets in larger games of power and secrecy. The Creel house stood abandoned in Hawkins for decades, its history of tragedy making it unsellable and unwelcome in the town's consciousness. In the 1950s, the Creel family moved into this house, and shortly afterward, violence erupted. The official story held that Victor Creel murdered his wife and daughter, though he maintained his innocence, claiming a demon had committed the killings. Victor was institutionalized, spending decades in a psychiatric hospital, while the house sat empty, earning a reputation as haunted. The truth, revealed in 1986, was far worse than ghost stories. Henry Creel, Victor's son, possessed psychic abilities and profound hatred for humanity. And he had killed his mother and sister using his powers, framing his father, and escaping to be taken in by Dr. Brenner and Hawkins' lab. The house retained echoes of that violence, and when Vecna needed a home base in the Upside Down, he chose the Creel house, establishing himself in the dark mirror of his childhood home. The house in the Upside Down became his lair, covered in vines and organic matter, its attic containing his physical body in a state somewhere between alive and dead, connected to the dimension itself. When Nancy, Steve, and Robin invaded this space to attack Vecna during his attempt to kill Max, they climbed the stairs of the Creel house in both dimensions, battling through a building soaked in old murders and new malevolence. Dart, the creature Dustin discovered in his trash can in 1984, began as a slug-like organism, pale and small, but quickly grew into a juvenile demogorgon or demo dog. Dustin, not understanding what he'd found, kept it as a pet, feeding it Three Musketeers candy bars and watching with scientific fascination as it molted and grew at an impossible rate. He named it D'Artagnan after the musketeer, shortening it to Dart for convenience. By the time Dustin realized Dart was becoming dangerous, it had eaten his mother's cat, grown to the size of a large dog, and developed the characteristic faceless head that opened into concentric circles of teeth. Dustin's affection for the creature, despite understanding what it was becoming, led him to try to contain it in his storm cellar rather than kill it immediately. When Dart escaped and joined the pack of demo dogs serving the Mind Flayer, Dustin feared their brief time as boy and pet would mean nothing to a creature operating under hive mind control. But in the tunnels beneath Hawkins, when the pack cornered Dustin, Dart recognized him, responding to the candy bar Dustin offered and holding back the other demo dogs long enough for Dustin to escape. This moment suggested that despite being connected to the Mind Flayer's consciousness, demo dogs retained some individual memory and capacity for what might be called affection, or at least recognition of kindness received. Dart's fate remains unknown, possibly killed when the gate closed, possibly surviving in the tunnels, a creature caught between two worlds with a unique experience of friendship across species and dimensions. The Snowball, Hawkins Middle School's winter dance in 1984, provided a moment of normal teenage experience for kids who'd spent the previous year fighting monsters and saving the world. The school gymnasium was decorated with streamers and paper snowflakes, a disco ball casting moving lights across the floor while a DJ played popular music from the era. For one evening, the party could pretend to be normal kids concerned with normal things like who would dance with whom and whether their outfits looked okay. Mike and Eleven danced to Every Breath You Take by the Police, Eleven wearing a dress and her hair grown out, looking like any other teenage girl rather than the lab experiment she'd been. Lucas and Max danced together, their relationship solidified. Will danced with a girl, trying to participate despite his lingering trauma. Dustin, having been rejected by multiple girls, found himself surprised when Nancy Wheeler asked him to dance, a kindness that meant everything to a kid who'd been feeling like the odd one out. The Snowball represented respite, a brief window where childhood could exist without threat, where the biggest concerns were crushes and embarrassment rather than life and death. Outside the gym, watching through the window, Hopper stood guard in the snow, ensuring his adopted daughter could have this experience safely. The juxtaposition of teenagers dancing to pop music while a police chief watched for interdimensional threats captured the strange duality of life in Hawkins, where the extraordinary and ordinary existed side by side, where kids who'd seen horrors beyond imagination still needed moments to just be kids, dancing in a decorated gym with paper snowflakes falling from the ceiling, pretending, at least for one night, that everything was normal.